the lane. 15-10. Touchdown, Chargers.
What's up, guys? Welcome into a brand new episode of Chargers Weekly. As always, joined by Matt Money Smith. Money, we are less than a week away from the NFL Scouting Combine. Q&A with the fans today, but I cannot wait for next week. We got a lot of surprises.
We do, yeah. I was kind of going through the questions to prep for today's pod, and I know there were a couple in there about the Combine, but I'll just kind of knock one out. Sorry, Chris, real quick.
For it.
You know, because you said the Combine. When are we going to start hearing from coaches at the Combine? I think we'll probably catch up with a couple of the coaches. Position coaches go out to the Combine to evaluate the talent. They fly in for the day of the drills for their respective position groups that they coach. And so the hope is that we'll catch up with a few of them while we're out there. But I'm excited. Obviously, used to cover the Combine for a decade plus with the NFL Network and NFL.com. As some of my favorite things, if not my favorite thing I've ever done in sports, when they, before the NFL realized the mistake they had made, they would put us on the field. They would let me just have complete free reign of the field with Bucky, DJ when he first got started, Lance Zierlein, Ike Taylor, Maurice Jones-Drew. There are about 7 or 8 of us, and we just had all access. We could go anywhere, stand exactly wherever we wanted. I was maybe 10 feet from Justin Herbert during his throwing drills when he came out. I remember the RG3 and Andrew Luck year, standing at the finish line when they're running their 40s, watching Andrew Luck doing the vert and the broad jump. And so the Combine has always had I've always had a very special connection. I really enjoy it. I know some people think it's a bit ridiculous, but just having been in the thick of it for as many years as I was, I do know how important it is and how much can change coming out of the Combine. People try to minimize it, but I've seen it firsthand. I've seen Teron Armstead go from someone absolutely nobody knew who he was, Arkansas Pine Bluff, to a mid-round pick and now one of the best. He should have been a first-round pick, but everyone was still like, don't know about the production, but you could see it on the field, just the way he moved. Things like that end up happening every single year at the Combine, so I'm excited.
It's my favorite event on the NFL calendar by far. I think the draft is second. Everybody has hope in March, and there's just so many things happening at the Combine, Money, independent of the workouts and the interviews. I mean, it's the start of free agency. It just new coaches, especially. I think the last time I was there was the Herbert year, pre-pandemic, and when you have a top 5 pick or a top 10 pick, or if you have a new coach, new GM, it just makes the event even more magnified. So I can't wait to dig in and talk to some of the position coaches and just look at some of these prospects, because at number 5 overall, we talked to Joe a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like this is a team that could do so many different things at number 5. And a lot of it is just contingent on the quarterbacks. Like the quarterbacks don't affect the Chargers because they don't need one, but they do because if somebody wants one and one's available at number 5 overall, you may get a haul that in years past you wouldn't get because this class is so strong. And I think they're projecting that this class, in comparison to next year's class, if you want a quarterback, this is probably the year to get it, no?
Yeah, it's not close as far as especially at the top. Caleb Williams, Drake May, when you're talking about next year at the top. And, I guess Quinn Ewers is probably the headliner as it stands right now. I don't know what kind of year Carson Beck's going to have at Georgia, but that's going to be a reason why someone could reach for and J.J. McCarthy is the one I think we're talking about. I don't think Jaden Daniels gets out of the top 5. I think he'd have to weigh in really light at the Combine, and I would assume we saw it last year with, Bryce Young ends up getting over 200 pounds and, immediately gets back down into the high 180s, 190s. So we'll see that with Jaden as well. He'll come in over 200 pounds. I don't know if they want to see him over 210 or what they want him to be, but you can make that happen with water weight. So I suspect those guys will go 1, 2, 3. I'd be really surprised if they didn't. But I think what we're seeing, and you saw it in DJ's latest mock draft at NFL.com, J.J. McCarthy at 8. to the Falcons. And JJ is going to end up being a very popular quarterback by the time the draft rolls around. And I think that's where that number 5 pick can come into play for a quarterback, because that's when you're really going to get the haul. If the Vikings, and I could see the Falcons or the Vikings. And look, a lot of this is going to depend on free agency. And Russell, what happens with Russell Wilson? What happens with Justin Fields? What happens with Kirk Cousins? There are some Jimmy Garoppolo. There are going to be some free agent. There's going to be some free agent movement that may dictate whether or not all of those teams have filled their hole or not. But I suspect I'd be very surprised if someone didn't trade up to number 5 to get McCarthy. If DJ's projecting him at number 8 to the Falcons, if he's as popular as we think he is, specifically in light of what Brock Purdy has done, someone who looks as though they're going to excel in that style of offense, someone who uses the middle of the field, someone who's got that athleticism, that is a very quick processor, that, is on time, that is accurate. There's going to be, I think about the Rams, the Vikings are the first two, the Falcons that come to mind, Raheem
Broncos,
just leaving Sean McVay. Yeah. So I think those particular teams are going to be really interested in JJ McCarthy and might want to trade up.
Yeah, we dove into this last week a little bit. Would you trade with the Broncos or Raiders, knowing that they would want JJ McCarthy? I don't know if Jim was talking about him being the number 1 quarterback in this draft.
Yeah.
So knowing that you'd have to play him twice a year, it's probably something you have to think twice about. But the fact
I think with the Broncos too, Chris, they're low on picks. They don't have a second. So You're talking about the Raiders do. So I think that's kind of, to me, that's the more interesting part, is if I think you want picks in the top 100. So if you're going to trade back that far, you're going to trade back to 12 or 13, you're going to want another one in the top 60 for sure. And you're going to probably want a third as well. It would be my guess. If that's how far back you're going to probably want their 2 and their 3, and maybe a conditional for next year or something along those, another 3 next year. Like that's a big drop. When you're going 7, 8 spots back, it's not like going to 8 and you go from 5 to 8 and you grab their 2, something like that. So to me, because we talked about it last week, and the more I thought about it, I'm like, you know what? I think it just comes down to the package. I think about what Joe said in his introductory press conference about comp picks and how this is really, it's a top heavy draft, but it's also a deep draft. And I think that to me would ultimately, like, whatever, you know what? We're not going to worry about JJ McCarthy to the Broncos or the Raiders. If they're the ones that are going to give us their 2nd and their 3rd and maybe a 1 next, something crazy like that, then yeah, whatever, take them. We're comfortable with Justin Herbert as maybe being the best quarterback, who can eventually become the best quarterback in the division, all due respect to Patrick Mahomes, but just someone who has the ability to perhaps dethrone him with the right coaching and the right pieces around him.
The Patriots are the biggest wild card here, because if we believe that Caleb Williams is going to go to Chicago and the Commanders are going to select their quarterback of the future, the Patriots, they have a young roster. Do you bring in a veteran and pair him with Marvin Harrison Jr.? So whatever they do, I think is going to really change the complexion of the draft and what the Chargers may get at number 5 too. Because let's say the Raiders want Jaden Daniels and they're going to give the Patriots an offer they can't refuse, and they just stack picks. They end up getting JJ McCarthy or Bo Nix or Penix later in the first round and have a haul of picks. I mean, I just look at those first 3 picks. They all need quarterbacks money. It's just dependent on, I guess, what direction they go. Some of these questions that we got, I almost feel like we should save some of them for next week, like with some of these analysts that we talk to, because, we're talking about 5th, 6th, and 7th round interior linemen. I think maybe guys like Lance or DJ or whoever may be better suited to answer those questions in late February. But let's just get right to some of these questions.
I would say something just real quick, Chris, before we start with the Q&A. And I'm looking at the mock draft, just kind of the draft order off the screen. I think it's also, it depends what the Chargers board looks like. Like, how closely graded out, or if it's offensive line, how close is Joe Alt to Fashanu, to Fuaga, to Latham? Because Justin Jefferson's going to make the most money of any player that's not a quarterback. That's what this contract's going to look like. And when you start talking about that and having to pay a wide receiver $32-33 million a year, if you have, if you think Terrion Arnold or Nate Wiggins or Quinion Mitchell, one of those corners, are graded very similarly to what you might get at 8 or 9 or 5. Brock Bowers, if you think he's going to slide to 15 or something, one of these teams could trade a haul to jump up to get Odunze, Neighbors, or Harrison because of just the economics. I mean, the fact that you can lock these guys in for 5 years and a franchise tag, 6 years, wide receivers are becoming that valuable because of what we're going to see with contracts. When you've got to pay, we saw it with Tennessee. We saw it with Stephon Diggs and Buffalo and getting Jefferson on that rookie contract because they did not want to pay Stephon Diggs. They didn't want to pay A.J. Brown. They thought they were going to replace him with Treylon Burks with the first-round pick. I think there's still potential outside of the quarterback where you could end up picking up a 2 and a 4 or something along a 2 and a high 3, to go back for one of these teams that may want to jump up, to get the Colts, the Saints, to get one of those 3 elite receivers that are going to end up going in the top 8 picks.
Yeah, it's a great point. And we also don't know what the Chargers are going to do with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. Like if Odunze, Neighbors, and one of those guys, Marvin Harrison, one of those guys will be there at 5. And if the Chargers have a super high blue chip grade on one of those guys and said, hey, this is the best player in the draft, stick and pick, right? Just start building Justin's weapons. See if you can get more out of Quentin Johnson in year 2. You got Joshua Palmer, and then we'll see what happens with Keenan and Mike. But there's just so many really solid options for the Chargers at 5. Which leads me to this first question by Alex Murray. With the limited amount of funds the Bolts have to spend in the offseason, which positions would you prioritize to a free agent signing? That's a good question. I'll just start out with one position. I think running back is an intriguing position in free agency because you can get guys for maybe a little bit cheaper. I mean, running backs, it is what it is. That's the cost of doing business, being a running back in the NFL. So I look at the Ravens roster. They have a lot of unrestricted free agents that Joe knows. I'm not saying they're going to go to that well the entire time, but there's some guys like Gus Edwards. There's some other, I think, running backs that could be very intriguing with what Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to do.
It'll probably depend on how they feel about the draft. You would much rather have a running back because you can get him in the middle rounds. You can get him late day 2. You can get him early day 3, late 3rd round, 4th round in that range. And now instead of paying him, $4.5 million, you're paying them $750,000. And that goes a long way when you're talking about the cap situation the Chargers are in. But you make a great point, Chris, because you think about what the Lions did last year with Montgomery and how important he was to them. And so you can get these players, Jamal Williams going to the Saints on just a tiny deal. There are going to be players available. You mentioned Gus Edwards, someone that Hortiz is certainly very familiar with. So you can get players that seem, that are relative bargains. I just don't know if they're enough of if even that is enough of a bargain. The Singletary contract, the Montgomery contract, the Jamal Williams contract. I don't even know if that's enough of a bargain to make it worthwhile to attack that position. They're going to sign free agents. I don't think there's any doubt about that. What I think, Coach Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz are going to be looking for is sort of, what this new coaching staff believes they can coach up. Hey, there's hidden value here. And these O-linemen, I believe there's hidden value in this center. And centers typically, can we find value in that position? And I think you'll probably find some, because they need to build depth on the O-line. I think you'll see some of those lower numbered signings at that position group. Linebacker is always interesting because they tend not to make a lot of money, but I think it's important to remember there's premium positions. I think you hit it on the head, right? It's probably not going to be wide receiver, defensive end, offensive tackle, corner. What what you probably could look like is interior line, linebacker, safety, running back is sort of, maybe a blocking tight end, which they desperately need. I think it's sort of that path that I would be looking for. I don't think there's going to be much in terms of a free agent splash. I'd be surprised.
Yeah. Someone had a question about Cody Whitehair getting released, the positional versatility as a guard and center. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Rams are going to release Brian Allen, their center. And,
right.
Zeitler's a free agent. So there's a lot of potential free agent options to kind of bolster the interior line. I do think center is going to be a priority, trying to get your center of the future, as opposed to maybe a guy who you have for a couple of years. And maybe that's something they do in the draft.
It's also important, Chris, to remember comp picks. Joe Hortiz specifically brought it up 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
You don't get comp picks by signing free agents, especially when the Chargers aren't going to have a whole lot going out. You can't cut a guy that then gets signed as a free agent and get a comp pick. It's when they leave an unrestricted free agency. And because they don't have a lot, there's Kenneth Murray, there's Alohi Gilman, you're trying to get that math to work out in your favor. So you get those comp picks, and you're not going to, that's not going to happen if you're busy signing a bunch of guys when you don't have a lot of guys going out this year.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is from Don. Provided Mayor Daniels is there at number 5 and the Chargers are offered a haul for the pick, what's the lowest number they would trade back for, and what position would they select? And he put cornerback, right tackle, center, edge, and why. I'll go first real quick, Bunny. I just think free agency is going to dictate a lot of what they do and who they get in free agency, who they're comfortable with on the roster, and how far back they're willing to go is how much the package is. I think the Chargers have a number of positions that they could attack. You mentioned corner. This is a pretty good corner class, and I would be surprised if they didn't select a corner early in this draft, because they need to kind of stockpile that position. But what do you think? There's a lot of different positions I think the Chargers could use right now.
Yeah, it's deep. It's pretty deep at 2 particular positions, and it happens to be 2 positions based on what happens with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen that the Chargers you could argue have as listed as needs, and that's tackle. It's an incredibly deep tackle class. It's tackle and it's wide receiver. It's a deep. I don't know where Brian Thomas is going to go, but if he's, he had the most touchdowns in football, and obviously was overshadowed by Malik Neighbors at LSU. But you're talking about a deep. You could end up having 6, 7, maybe 8 wide receivers go in the first round. You're probably going to end up having 7 tackles go in the first round. So just think about that. If you've got a first round grade, let's say there's a first round grade on 4 receivers. You got a first round grade on, let's say, 3 tackles, Wiggins, Mitchell, and Arnold. That's now 7. You've got a first round grade on probably, I would guess, 5 tackles, Alt, Fashanu, Fuaga, Latham, and probably, it's escaping me the name out of Washington. You got those 5 guys. You've got, that's a lot. If you're talking about 4 quarterbacks now you're talking about maybe going down as far as 16, because here's look, this might just be my philosophy, but I would assume it's subscribed to by most GMs. To me, the first round, draft a premium position, draft a tackle, draft a defensive end, draft a corner, draft a wide receiver, draft a quarterback. To me, that's important, because you tend to be able to find the other positions late. It's something the Rams have been really good at. They have not had those first round picks. And when you look at all of their selections, when they have these 2s and 3s and 4s, they're linebackers, safeties, tight ends, guards. You can really stock your roster and build some depth in those later rounds. So when I think about 4 corners, the 5 wide receivers, Brock Bowers, there's enough there where you could trade back to the late teens, maybe the mid to late teens, and still feel really good about the player you're going to get. Now, I'm going to make this even longer. There's also the idea, like you said earlier, Chris, about the blue chip. Do we really want to get out of the range of Neighbors, Odunze, Harrison Jr., Alt, Fashanu, Bowers. Do we want to remove ourselves from those 6 players? Would also be the conversation.
Yeah.
Or Terrion Arnold if he's in there, or Quinion Mitchell if he's, you know what I mean? Like that's the secondary conversation. How big of a drop is it from what we have listed as this top heavy, really, really talented at the top draft, and where we want to find ourselves?
I don't know if you can go past 15, but do you subscribe to this though, Money? Like, because you have Justin Herbert, and we've seen what he's done with guys like Guyton and T. Billy, you can get away with getting an extra second or a future first and draft a guy like Brian Thomas, and then have an extra pick to restock your secondary, or to get another edge player,
right,
to get another interior lineman or offensive lineman. Like, I think those are the conversations in terms of roster building and team building that you probably have to have. Is, yes, Rome Odunze and Neighbors and Marvin Harrison. Yeah, those are like slam dunk blue chippers. But if you can get a couple extra picks in this draft and you really like some of these position groups, is it worth getting the 4th or 5th best receiver in this draft? Or maybe Brock Bowers drops a little bit because of just some of the needs at the top of the draft. And then you get an extra corner, or you get your future center in the 2nd round. I mean, I think those are the conversations that you have to have, right?
Certainly. And just the team needs depth. And I think that's where it really comes in is, and to me, once you get out of those, to me, Thomas is going to work his way into that conversation of being probably top half of the 1st round, again, just because of the economics. So I think once you get outside of that, there's 17. Yeah, I think DJ's got, or maybe it was Dane Brugler I heard say he's got 17 receivers in his top 100. So, you can wait. That's where I would then, let's try to get a high 2nd rounder and just stack the O-line. Get the center, get the tackle, and now you have depth. Now you have depth with Pipkins. You have depth with Sawyer. You can maybe find a starting center out there, or another center to create some depth on your offensive line. We know how Jim Harbaugh wants to play. How did he beat Ohio State 3 years in a row? How did he win a national championship? Physical line play, dominating at the lines, taking a team, we say it all the time, into the deep end in the 4th quarter and pulling them under. That's the way he plays football. It's the way he's always played football. So to me, and it's Fatanu out of Washington, Amarius Mims I forgot about, who's just an absolute mammoth human being out of Georgia. Like, you're talking about 6 tackles. So you could trade back and feel real good. And now if, you're looking at, again, if you're looking at centers, because clearly the way they restructured Corey Linsley's contract, it appears as though he's going to retire in, at the start of June. And this was just some cap math to help them out. But if you look at centers, now you can get both. Now you can get your tackle, and who knows, maybe you decide tackle's really deep and you just love Jackson Powers Johnson, because that guy's going to go in the top 20. And you have him rated just considerably higher than Zach Frazier, who's a name that we've talked about here. And I know DJ likes the guy out of Duke quite a bit, who's technically a guard, but very well could end up transitioning, or I think he was a tackle, but he's projected as a guard.
I think Bucky has him as the top guy too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those where you're now doing the math. We need to get deep. We need a lot of picks. I know that was a long answer, but
great segue though into our next question, Money, from David Thompson. You can only double dip on one position group in the draft. Which do you choose and why? For me, it's interior or offensive line and defensive line. I know the defensive line class isn't really heavy at the top,
great.
But you need to build that. The way that Harbaugh wants to play, you got to build your lines. So I think double dip on the lines, offensive line, defensive line.
100% agree. I would go corner. I just feel it's the thinnest group. Mike Davis is a free agent. J.C. Jackson did not work out. He's going to count out $20 million against the cap. Got Asante. They need corners.
Yeah.
You got Patrick Mahomes in the division. You got Joe Burrow in the conference. Josh Allen in the conference. You got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle down in Miami. You need corners desperately. So, and they're great. what did Brandon Staley always tell us? Favorite special teams players were corners. Was always going to populate the roster with corners, especially with those late round picks, because he believes they're the best special teams player. And we saw that with Dean Leonard and Ja and those guys on special teams. So you get that double dip there. Great special teamers, along with the position that's probably the thinnest outside of running back because of the free agents with Austin and Joshua Kelly. So that would be the one that I would love to see attacked.
Yeah. It just speaks to the fact that you need depth, and this team needs depth at a lot of key positions. Some of the questions, and it makes sense. A lot of fans want to talk about the running back and the wide receiver and the tight end, but it's just not a 7-on-7 team, right? Like you really have to build your team through the draft, and it may not be sexy to talk about the offensive line, the defensive line, and maybe some of the corner positions, but this team really needs to identify how they're going to play football, how they're going to protect Justin Herbert, and obviously get him weapons too. So it's so fun to talk about. I remember last year we talked about Bijan Robinson and Zay Flowers and all
right.
these different wide receivers and running backs that could be potential toys for Justin Herbert, but it goes a little bit deeper than that too. Let's see. Flock with me. What's a position or two that you both think the draft can't answer for us that we would need to find in free agency or via trade? That's a good question.
Well, so much of it is like we don't know what they're going to do with these players. Like what if they go to Mike and say, "We're going to let you go," and you're coming off an ACL, and Mike's camp says, "I want another crack at it. Just look at it as a free agent year. Let's reset this. Let's make it a 1-year prove it deal. I feel really good about this coaching staff and what I have to contribute." And now you're keeping everyone. And now you've got Mike and Keenan and Josh Palmer and Q. So now you're deep there. And same thing with Bosa. No, I want to play for Jesse Minter. I know I would much rather do that than be traded somewhere. So I think that's such a big part of it. Because to me, that's the one concern is, okay, if you're gonna trade away Joey and Khalil and you only have Thule, and it's not a real deep edge class, how are you going to find that second pass rusher? And is it Matabike? Like, are you willing to invest a bunch of money there because now you've cut all this money out because Mike and Joey and Khalil are all gone and Keenan's restructured and now you've got $40-50 million in money to spend. So much can change based on how they want to approach those 4 contracts.
Yeah, that's it.
Safety's not a real there aren't great safeties, and they need a safety. Aloe's a free agent. So is there a safety out there that they can go get that they think fits the system that Jesse Minter's going to be playing? In terms of just position groups that aren't deep, tight end is not deep. So outside of Brock Bowers, you've got a pretty big drop off. There isn't really an elite running back in this draft. You talked about that earlier. So yeah, there are some position groups that you may have to fill via free agency. And the good news is they're not typically high priced.
No, you got guys like Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz. Those are some of the tight ends that are out there. And we know Hunter and Justin play together.
I would love a reunion with Hunter.
Yeah.
If you tell me you got to pass on Bowers, but you're going to get Hunter Henry on a team-friendly number, along with now you're drafting a tackle and a center or a blue-chip wide receiver and an interior line and a corner, great, 100%. We know how much Justin loved having Hunter around, and we know that he's a full-service tight end. So that's great point. Like that would be an ideal free agent signing to bring him back.
Bottom line is, like you said, between Mike Keenan, Joey, and Khalil, all that needs to be hashed out before we can even kind of see the plan come into place with free agency and then the draft. And we're going to have so many different Thursdays where we have different iterations of this podcast and what they may do based on what's happened in free agency. Greg Kim, I know this guy. If you were a draft prospect, what day of the combine would you prefer to do your drills, Money? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday?
So interesting about the combine, every player isn't there at the same time. they fly the groups in based on what day they work out. So it's not like everybody gets to the combine on Monday
and you're waiting.
And if you're a corner, you got to sit around till Sunday. No, you fly in on Friday if you're the corner, and you get all your medical done. And then Saturday you're doing your interviews. Sunday you're doing your drills, and you're out. So they stack it where the guys aren't there at the same time. The one day I wouldn't want to be is Sunday, because for the most part, a lot of the GMs and team brass are gone. They leave on Saturday. Sunday's a ghost town. So that's just the one day I wouldn't. If I feel like I've got something to prove at the combine and this is going to help my stock, I would want to do it in front of the head coach and the GM. As much as I appreciate the DC and the secondary coaches being there who can go back and report, I'd like to have that head coach and that GM be wowed by what I did out there. So that would probably be the one day that I would not want to be there, because it's interesting. I don't know how to explain it, because the corners are typically the best athletes there, and they do put on a show, and it's the most fun drill. They do the gauntlet drill, on Sunday, and it's a lot of fun, and it's just kind of this back end. They do the gauntlet drill for the wide receivers, but they do these games with the corners, and it ends up being a lot of fun. But that'd be the one day, just because a lot of people are already gone and they're over it. They're ready to get the heck out of there. Haven't been there since Monday. They want to get out of town.
Yeah. Give me day one. I want to be the first.
Yeah.
First in, make a good impression. Here we go. We kind of answered this one. Thoughts on trading down and trying to get Powers Johnson. Listen, anything's a possibility there. Reasonable.
Yeah, you trade down and get a blue chip. That's what you want.
Yeah.
Trade down, but don't trade down so far that you lose out on what you have a first round grade on, and someone is going to be able to help you. That's why Powers Johnson's so interesting. It's not the sexiest position, but people are really freaking out over how good of a center he is.
How would you guys feel if the Chargers walked away with Brock Bowers, Xavier Legette from South Carolina, who had some nice highlights, and the Notre Dame running back?
Fine. For me, whoever, I have so much confidence in this front office. I do. I feel like the coaching and the front office folks are in sync. That Greg Roman is going to dial up this run offense. He's going to tell you what he needs. There's so many people that have been so successful everywhere they've been that I'm just, whichever direction they go, I can see it making sense. I can see Brock Bowers making a ton of sense. I can see Joe Alt or Fuaga or Fashanu. I could see Terry and Arnold or Dallas Turner. And now you've got your two edges with Thule and Turner set for a while. Byron Murphy, because you need someone on the interior line. Like, there's so many. I don't know what it says about the team. It just feels like there's so many directions they can go that make a ton of sense.
The only issue I would have with that is that it's all skill position guys, when we've also talked about building the offensive line and defensive line, and those guys would all be first, second, third round picks.
I don't think it's a likely path. If you go receiver first, you're going to see some line and that's why the trade down makes so much. I'm sure. I would imagine that Joe Hortiz and Jim Harbaugh are doing everything they can to pump up J.J. McCarthy and how this guy is it. And you're going to want to come up to get, because they want to trade down. Ultimately, that's what they want. They know they need to restock this team. And so they're looking for 2 extra picks. And if they can somehow figure out a way to trade down twice, let's say they can trade from 5 to 6. What if Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison are both taken? What if that's the move? And now the Giants are like, hey, we want Odunze. We'll give you a third if you just let us move up 1 spot. Great. Now you're at 6. And now someone's like, we want Jaden Daniels. And now you can trade back to 8. And that's what they want to do. They want to amass more than their 3 picks in the top 100. They want to try to get 6 or 7 in the top 100 like Arizona has.
That's what the Ravens do too, man. Like you talked about Kyle Hamilton a couple years ago glowingly, like this is the dude, and the Ravens end up with him at like 13. You know, they find ways to win the draft always. So, you know, Joe's been in a lot of those war rooms. Jake Nelson asks a two-parter. Could you guys explain how compensatory picks are acquired, how fast the Chargers could start accumulating them? And then number 2, any veteran/role players you see taking a leap this year due to the Minter Roman scheme changes? The compensatory pick. So it looks like that's going to be announced soon. And based on over the cap, it seems like the Chargers may just get one because of Drew
a 7th
Tranquill.
rounder. Yeah, they got a 7th rounder coming. That's it. So the way they work is it's what goes out versus what comes in. And there's different rules that go into that formula of how you are dinged, what level of free agency you know, what type of players you sign. If you sign someone, another player is cut, it's different than an unrestricted free agent. If basically it's how many of your players that are unrestricted free agents that end up being, particularly coming off their rookie contract, that get signed by other teams versus how many you've signed to join your team, determine what the compensatory pick awards are and how good is that player versus, you know, however good that player happens to be will determine, is it a 7th, 6th, 5th, 4th, or 3rd rounder where you get your compensatory. Think about Baltimore. CJ Mosley gets signed by the Jets. That's a 3rd round compensatory pick. Yeah. You mentioned Drew Tranquill. Chargers let him go. They sign Eric Kendricks, but Tranquill goes out. Like, that's a 7th round pick because he had a better year than, you know, and Kendricks doesn't count against that anyway because he's, you know, a vested vet. So that's kind of what we're talking about is how soon? Not soon, because they're not going to have a lot of those top tier free agents that are going to be signed away. So it's going to have to be. Who are the guys
you think this year, Money? Like Kenneth Murray, potentially?
Kenneth Murray, Alohi Gilman, Austin. Yeah, I think that's kind of what you're looking at. Like Kenneth Murray would probably be the biggest one just because of his draft status and because he's got potential to be an impact player. Yeah. So Murray would probably be the top one. Then you got Alohi Gilman, but they don't have a lot. Like there's not going to be, and remember, like other teams are playing the same game. Yeah. So they're going to follow the same rules. You don't want to sign that player in the first wave of free agency. That's a loss in the compensatory formula. You want to sign him in the second wave. And that's how you can play this game and end up building that war chest. So, but the second part of that, when can it happen? Not soon, which is why they have to manipulate the draft to try to acquire more picks in order to fill the void of lack of compensatory picks. What was the second part of that question?
Second part was veteran/role players that could take a leap due to the Minter Roman scheme. Quickly, I'll add, you know, I think Thule's just going to take a leap in general in this scheme, and it's going to be great. I think Henley's another guy. And, you know, somebody in the interior, like you look at just the history of the Michigan defensive lines and just the good interior play. Someone like Tito Obonya, could maybe take a leap. And then offensively, real quickly for me, Quentin Johnston, I think he can only go up. And if you talked about these TCU specials, if they can get him in a groove, catching the football and just having a specific role on this football team, I hope big things for Quentin in year 2.
So he already had a great year, but Jesse Minter needs Thule to be great. Yeah, because it's all about edge pressure. They need that edge pressure. So that's one. You already said Henley. He's got an opportunity. You think about those, you know, those linebackers and what they're able to do at Michigan. Derwin is an obvious one. Yeah, Derwin didn't have the best year last year, and so I would expect him to have a huge bounce back year. But,
how do you feel about the defensive line right now, Money? Interior.
They need help. There's a ton. I mean, they're all gone. You know, Sebastian Joseph Day obviously was cut. Austin Johnson's a free agent. Love Scott Matlock. Love Tito. And hopefully they'll be able to provide some depth. But they need players on the interior line, no doubt. They need, and whatever they decide to do with Joey and Khalil will determine if they need edge. So there's a lot of work to do defensively. Yeah, a lot of work to do defensively. Offensively, if I were to pick one, Zion Johnson. I think Zion had a rough go last year, and with Devlin and Nick Hardwick, I feel like he's got all the tools to be a great interior lineman and just needs better coaching. And I would suspect that he'll get that from those two guys.
So last year, the big name was Bijan Robinson. I feel like we got a Bijan Robinson question every time we did this. I can't tell you how many Brock Bowers questions there are.
Yeah.
I love that we have an early pick. Do you think he's worth the 5th pick? There are many options. That's from Eddie. Roberto, how do you guys feel about Bowers? I feel like he's the missing elite tight end the Chargers haven't had. Our boy Brian Rick has Bowers fully healed from his injury. Will that affect his draft value, in your opinion, to where we could possibly trade back a few spots and still grab him? Brock Bowers is on the minds of Chargers fans, Bunny.
It'd be great. He's an exceptional player. The thing about, look, Bowers is a mismatch. He's so good. He's got incredible hands. He's fast. He's very long. So he's not a big dude. And everybody saw that photo that was circulating from Super Bowl of him standing next to Gronk, and it's like, whoa. Gronk is a freak. He's the ultimate outlier because he was that big and that athletic. Like,
plus
Gronk
angles and photos, man. I don't know if he's that much smaller.
He's pretty small. Like, Bowers, in terms of tight ends, is not the biggest guy. He's listed at 6'4". He's probably 6'3" and change, maybe. He's listed at 240. He's probably more like 230. So he's not big, but he's got really long arms and he's incredibly strong. And he's just so sudden and so quick as a tight end. And he has explosiveness. So once the ball's in his hand, tight ends tend to be seam routes and I'm going to get to the middle field. I'm able to, I'm faster than your line. If you're the elite ones, I'm faster than your linebacker. I'm stronger than your safety. Bowers has elite athleticism. He is shaking guys off the line of scrimmage, and he's quick into his cuts. He snatches the ball. Think about the stuff we were talking about with Quentin that he struggled with gathering, body catcher, that he had to work on to continue to evolve his game. Bowers does not break stride, man. He is snatching that thing out in front of him, and he is in a dead-ass run. And if you've got a linebacker on him, you're dead to rights. And if you watch the Georgia games, if you watch the Bowers tape, so much of it are just flares and smokes and screens and just passes to the flat. And you just watch him explode, and he's got the angle. Like, they can't catch up to him because he's that fast. So he's just a different type of player. Now, and the thing with the size, why it's such a big deal, is you're talking about, is he a Y? Is he a full-service tight end? It appears to be strong enough. He's not going to be elite in that category, but he's good enough where I don't think he's getting where he's a waste inside. So he certainly seems like a Jim Harbaugh player. I mean, he is tough as nails. And look, how important was Sam Laporta to the Lions offense this year? I mean,
gigantic.
You could argue he was the most important pass catcher, even ahead of Amon-Ra, because of what he meant in the red zone on third down, critical downs. He was the guy. So, just think of it that way. Think of, had the Chargers taken Sam Laporta last year in the first round, what we'd be talking about right now, just how good. And he's really a receiving tight end. He's more in that Travis Kelce mode would you use a first-round pick on Sam Laporta? Of course you would, knowing now what you know. So to me, Bowers makes sense. So here's the flip side of it.
Yeah. Would you take him at 5? Right.
That's the flip side. Probably not, because you're talking about position. You can't take Brock Bowers at 5 if Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, or Marvin Harrison Jr. are there.
And they
Why?
will be.
Because the second you take Brock Bowers, he becomes one of the 5 highest paid players at his position. So immediately, and by the time he's on his 5th-year option, he'll be the 3rd or 2nd highest paid tight end. So that's the thing. When you get Odunze or Harrison or a tackle like Alt, think about the contract Rashawn Slater's going to sign and this offseason. Laramie Tunsil's making $28 million a year. So Travis Kelce's making 13. That's why you can't take the tight end that high, or why it's hard to take him that high, because if Justin Jefferson's going to make $33 million a year, I want to take Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors so I don't have to pay a receiver $33 million. I've got a top 10 receiver in the league for $6 million in his fourth year. That's what you have a tight end in his fourth year for $6 million. Congratulations. You got one of the fifth highest paid tight ends in the league. So that's where the economics of it come into play and why it's so hard to draft someone like that high.
Yep. Excellent point. A couple more. And, we have so many. We'll get to some of these next week too. We'll ask some of our guests some of these questions, but our boys from Thunder Down Under, a lot of fans online seem to hate the idea of the Bolts sticking at 5 and picking an offensive tackle, which was floated in DJ's mock. How would you both feel about it? First of all, DJ has so many iterations of this thing. He's on 2.0, I think, right now. So he's going to have like 5 or 6 more. But it fills a need. That's it. It fills a need. And the Chargers have a lot of them. So I don't have a problem with Joe Alt going at number 5 if Hortiz and company think that that's the guy.
Look, again, I'll go back to the Lions. How do you feel about having Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker? Like, how do you feel about having that offensive line? Do you think the Lions got to where they were because of as good as Jahmyr Gibbs was or Amon-Ra St. Brown is, or we already talked about Sam Laporta? No, they got there because of their line. It's the best blocking line in football, and they have time to operate. Jared Goff does not operate well in a muddy pocket. Pocket was clean for the most part on their march to the NFC Championship game. So lines are important. And guess what? If you take Alt and he's as good as we think he is, and we know Slater is an all-pro level tackle on the other side, you know how much better Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, and Quentin Johnston are going to be? Because he's got time. Now they've got time. Now Keenan's got time to break his guy down because he's the best route runner in the league. Quentin's got time to get that foot in the ground and start to get that inside leverage on those slants. Mike Williams has got time to get a 50-50 ball down there. Josh Palmer, that's a tackle is the foundation of an offensive play. If protection holds up, there's so much more you can do. Think about how miserable the run game was and has been really for 7 years.
Yeah.
Alt is a massive human being, a giant of a human being. And if you move Zion back to that side, you're talking about 2 of the biggest players at their position that are now on the right side, typically your run-heavy side of the line. Now your running game's working. Well, guess what? Now play action is now in play again. Whereas before, nobody bid on play action. They're like, whatever, run it. We don't care. It's a win for us. So all of that stuff comes into play and is upgraded because of your line. It's not just picking Joe Alt. It's picking Joe Alt to keep the pocket clean. It's picking Joe Alt because now a tackle guard tandem can connect and build a wall on that side of the ball.
I think DJ also referenced money that the Ravens selected Jonathan Ogden and had him as a guard his first year.
His first year.
Yeah. So you get the best guy and you figure it out. And when you have elite players, they can play different positions. And Alt Slater 1-2 punch is pretty good in a AFC West that's loaded, and you need to beat the Chiefs.
When you have Justin Herbert's arm, it's not just the receiver. It's the time for the route to develop. When you have that kind of talent that can push the ball 60 yards in the air, keep the pocket clean. And guess what? He's going to be able to push the ball downfield more.
Excuse me. Last one. What is the projected split between 11-12 personnel going to be with Roman and Harbaugh calling the shots? How important is having 3 wide receivers on the field compared to extremely potent 2 tight end sets? Most teams these days are running around 65-75% 11 personnel. The days of Mike Keenan, Quentin, or another capable wide receiver will likely change greatly. It's a great question. And I think what they decide to do will dictate the personnel and the decisions they have to make, especially at the wide receiver position.
I mean, that's one of the things about what Stanford did when Jim Harbaugh showed up, is when he was running with 6 offensive linemen, 2 tight ends, because the Pac-12 didn't have the personnel to deal with it. It was a quarterback passing conference. And so he just did the math. He's like, okay, well, everybody is running 11 personnel, and everyone's trying to get enough corners to keep up with it. Now they've got enough corners because that's what they've populated their roster with. all their linebackers are light in the ass. So because they've got to keep up with all of these pass catchers running all over the place. Well, guess what? We're going to go out there with, and I called a ton of these Stanford games. The splits were so tight. It was I just remember watching it going, my God, this is so different than everything else we're watching. They've got 6 offensive linemen and 2 tight ends. And I mean, you couldn't put a credit card between those bodies, and they would snap the ball and just wreck shop. So I think it's all math. And it's what do we do to think about what Greg Roman did in Baltimore when they got Lamar Jackson. They're like, you know what? We're going to run a ton of 12. We're going to run a bunch of 13. And, you know, and we're going to run 3 tight ends. And we're going to run, and Lamar is going to be the ultimate X factor because they started doing that. They were doing, you know, and Patrick Ricard is whatever he is, a fullback, an extra offensive lineman, guy's 305 pounds. Like, so that to me is it's whatever they think the math is. If they feel like they want to play ball like they did in Baltimore and they want to play ball like they did at Stanford, then yeah, you're going to see a lot more 12. You're going to see a 6th offensive lineman. You're going to see some 13, and you're going to see, you know, Greg Roman's a run guy. He is one of, if not the best. Look, there's Kyle Shanahan, who is incredible with the run, no doubt about it. That is what that offense is. It is predicated on the success of the run. Same with Sean McVay. So I can't call him the best in terms of offensive run calling, but he's up there. Like, he's really good at it. So yeah, there's probably going to be a lot of 12. But if you, again, let's just say Mike Williams wants to come back. You don't want Mike, Keenan, Josh, Quentin. Like, you don't want three of those guys on the field at the same time. If that's your advantage, it's whatever you think you have an advantage at is what you're going to do. It's not just Roman saying, hey, we got to play in 12. We got to play with 2 tight ends every snap. That's not how it works. It's what's our advantage? How do we gain an advantage with our numbers? And that's what it'll come down to.
The best coaches look at their personnel first and then cater their system around the personnel that they have.
Right.
Justin Herbert's a different quarterback from Lamar Jackson, and you know, you go down the line of the history of Greg Roman. He's had different guys, but he's been effective at running the football, which should be music to Chargers fans' ears after what we've seen the last few years running the ball. You have to be able to run the football
100%.
money.
It's been so strange with Baltimore. And we saw it firsthand in 2018. They come out and they just start throwing the ball all over, and it's like, thank you. Because remember, Chargers are playing with Adrian Phillips as their only linebacker.
Yeah.
And they start throwing the ball. After 2 weeks prior on a Saturday night, they ran it down the Chargers' throats. It was the weirdest thing ever. So I think it's important to just remember it's not about philosophy. It's about personnel and opponent and advantage. And that's what'll dictate how you play.
Yep. By the way, I think Haley Elwood did interviews with Roman, Minter, and Ficken, which
Check
I'm
those
sure
out.
is coming to Chargers.com soon, and get a little more insight on their philosophies and how they want to play ball in Los Angeles. That's going to do it for us. Money, anything else before we pack our bags, go to Indy? We got a lot of fun stuff next week.
Yeah, just keep an eye because it's not going to be the Thursday pod. We're going to probably post 2, maybe 3 of these things, and I know we already have Lance Erline, whose dad, one of the great offensive line coaches ever, and nobody knows more about offensive line in the draft than Lance. He's going to join us. I know Nate Tice, also dad, one of the great offensive line coaches in the NFL of all time, and Nate is great at breaking it down for the Athletic. He's going to join us, and we're going to get a lot of people. We've got a lot of friends out there. We're gonna wrangle them, throw them in the chair, and have a chance to catch up with them and get some of that outside perspective about what they think the Chargers need and what they're going to do. It's going to be a lot of fun, and just please keep tabs because it's not just going to be a Thursday pod. You're going to see a lot more than that. Maybe it'll be short YouTube videos at Chargers.com or videos at Chargers.com of those one-offs, or it'll be multiple pods, maybe even every day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, something along those lines.
Yeah, keep tabs on the subscription, and man, I think I say it every time, but we appreciate the questions. So many good ones, a ton of them this time around, and we'll use some of these questions that you guys have for our guests next week too to get another opinion, an outside opinion on this Chargers team and the draft moving forward. So that'll do it for Money. I'm Chris. We will see you in Indy next week.